Hey guys, so my name is Lori Nixon. I am a reading interventionist at Gainesville Independent School District. My campus specifically is W.E. Chalmers Elementary. I teach second through fourth grade. This year, I teach primarily second grade students. I pull 12 second grade classes and I pull 4 fourth grade classes. So we combine those, and I end up teaching 7 class periods total. So primarily, I teach second grade. Supplemental, I have to be honest, the kiddos that I teach this year are either kindergarten or on a first grade level. So I work mostly with reading A to Z books, or I work with books that are sight word based for those students. For my fourth grade students, I use a program called System 44. And so System 44 actually has a book that goes along with it, and depending on the lessons that that group is at my small group, then that's what we read together is out of the group book. And then they have supplemental books based on those students' reading levels that they can either read digitally through the System 44 system, or I have a classroom library. I can pull those books and then we can read them together if we have time in our small group, or they can read those individually and then go online and take quizzes and etc. So that's kind of how I use my supplemental books. Not super familiar with young adult novels. So this was an adventure for me and something that I looked forward to, and ended up being a very exciting thing for me. So I look forward to our book talk today about We Were Liars by Emily Lockhart. Today we're going to talk about We Were Liars. And when I began to look into what book I wanted to choose, I went to everyone's number one resource for um, researching what we should do nowadays, and that was TikTok. So I went to TikTok books and I found their top 10 list for young adult novels. And this was on their top 10 list, We Were Liars. And it stood out to me, just the title, because I thought, as a young adult, if we're honest, completely honest with ourselves, at some point in time, we were all little liars. We just were. It also stood out to me was because that was when my daughter was at home and she was in her teenage years. That was one of her favorite shows, was to watch Pretty Little Liars. So I thought, why not? Let's try this. When I began looking into their awards, they had several awards, as you can see there on the screen. So I thought, yeah, let's go. Let's try We Were Liars. To read or not to read. So if I'm presenting this book to my students as a book talk, and I'm wanting to get my students excited about this book, I'm going to talk about Cadence and her friends. Cadence, the main character, and her friends, they don't call each other family. She doesn't say, I go to Beechwood every year to meet my family. She doesn't say, I go to Beechwood every year to meet my group of friends. She says, I go to Beechwood and I'm excited to see the liars, my liars. That's how she refers to them. I mean, as a seventh grade student, wouldn't you get excited to think, why are they liars? I think I would have to ask my students, have you ever lied? Have you told big lies? Have you told little lies? Isn't just the title itself intriguing? And then when you find out that there's so much more we can relate to within this book, I would have to ask my students, how many of you have ever felt like you were in a situation where racially you didn't belong? How many of the times where you find yourself in a situation where socially, economically, you felt like you didn't belong? How many times have you been so frustrated at your parents you did not want to hear the sound of their voice not one more time? How many times have you looked at your grandparents and thought, really? They have no clue. They are so out of touch. And did any of these things ever make you think you might could tell a little lie, even a big lie? So Cadence and her group of liars is definitely something that I feel like my students would be able to connect with, would get excited about reading. And that's why I think We Were Liars would be a good choice for a young adult novel. When I looked into justifications for the age group that I think would be a good choice, I found several different websites and they went anywhere from fourth grade to saying that the beginning level was seventh grade. I understand that there are some fourth grade students that can read on a 600 Lexile, so I understand the justification, but I ended up sticking with, I feel like the seventh grade reading level would be the earliest I would think that a student should read this. I know for my district, after, I hate to say the C word, but after COVID, so many students have fallen behind that in seventh grade, for some students, 600 Lexile might be a difficult read. So I feel like seventh grade would be a good place to start if you were going to use this in your classroom. So the TEKS that I chose were 7.1C, 7.5C. I feel like these two TEKS are appropriate because we do need to be able to present a critique of literary work. We need to, when we're doing that presentation, we need to be able to have eye contact. We need to make sure that we're speaking at a rate and volume and enunciation that people are going to be able to understand and that we can communicate those ideas effectively. We also need to make sure that we're making correct predictions. We need to be able to look at the different features in the book and the characteristics of the genre and the structures and be able to relate to that. So I feel like these two TEKS would be a good jumping off point for teaching this novel. My resources that I looked into were teachingbooks.net. It was a very valuable resource. And teachingbooks.net is actually where I found that they said that seventh grade is where you should start with this book. And I agree with that. That's why I didn't cite the other resources that said you could start at a fourth grade level. I just feel like after reading this book, that was just too early. Teacher Pay Teachers had some great things. And also, due to my experience as a teacher, the oldest grade level I've taught is fourth grade. And with my emerging bilingual students, one of the areas that is a huge struggle for them as far as comprehension is vocabulary. So vocabulary.com had a list for this book in particular for free where we could go in and we could do a vocabulary study. And so I felt like that was a great resource to have for teaching this book. For specific things that I would teach in my classroom, if I'm looking at teaching, the first thing I want to say is that I believe I would create a readers group. I don't know that this would be a book that I would try to teach to the whole class. One, because of the reason I stated before, we may have students that are not at that 600 Lexile, and this book may be frustrational for them. And I would never want to assign my students something that would be frustrational. Now, I don't say that to say that I would limit them if they're not at a 600 Lexile that they could not be a part of that readers group. That's not what I'm saying, but I think I would want to make it their choice. So by saying that, the other thing that I feel like I would need to do to create this group is to send out email or a letter home from the parent with a notification that I have let my administration know that there is some language that could be considered vulgarity. I personally, in my home, would consider it vulgarity. And make sure that the parents have signed off and give their students permission to be a part of the readers group that's going to read this book. Me personally, I think I would have had a problem with a teacher assigning my daughter this book as a seventh grader and not asking my opinion of whether I would allow her to read this book or not, just because of the foul language that is included in the book. Some of the other things, once I formed that readers group, once I have that parental permission, that I found that were really good. Emily Lockhart on her website, she has some teachers guides and some activities that she suggests using, and I really liked her teachers guide. I also found on Teacher Pay Teachers a teachers guide where when you're doing your readers group, you could go in and ask questions. The one on Teacher Pay Teacher, it has questions like, what role does Cadence's grandfather play in the story? Consider Cadence narration, and different types of questions like this. Emily Lockhart's really, I liked hers. I feel like it went a little more in depth. She wants the students to say, what ways does the father's abandonment of their family impact Cadence? I feel like that would be a question that we could talk about openly and let each other understand more about each other's lives. It would be a moment where I would be able to share with them about how my father was not a huge part of my life, my natural father growing up. It would be something that I would be able to share with them, and they would be able to have a little bit of insight into me. Um, Also, in Emily Lockhart's on her website, she goes to the next where they said that we should cite at least 3 examples of related literature. Well, she offers up some examples that if we used literature such as King Lear or Wuthering Heights, one of her questions says, how does the author's use of Shakespeare's King Lear and Bronte's Wuthering Heights influence the story? So if we're using those as supplemental reading, then we can also bring that into our readers group and discuss those type of things using Emily Lockhart's guide. So I really like that. Some of the other things that I found on the teachingbooks.net, I found a printable story map where you can go in and edit it based on what it is that you're talking about that week. So we could actually do individual story maps each week for our readers group, or we could go out 3 weeks and say, okay, over the last 3 weeks, these are the chapters we've discussed. Let's build this story map. Let's talk about it. Another really cool thing I found on teachingbooks.net was they had a mystery lesson where the students take what you're reading and they look at it as a detective. So they really go in and dig out those pieces. And again, it's editable. So you could go in and create, what is it that you're wanting them to build upon? What is it you're talking about? And you can really make it specific for your lesson. The last thing that I found was a news broadcast. And I really related to this because I remember being in 7th grade. I took a class called Career Investigations. And one of the things that we did in this class was we chose from topics, discussion topics, and we had to create a news crew. And that news crew had to report on these discussion topics. So I really connected with this lesson that I found. And I thought, what a great way if they had to even take from the mystery lesson that we had done in the past, and then they had to create their news crew. They had to have writers, they had to have a reporter, they had to have an eyewitness, an expert account. So they had to really divide up into these groups and decide who wanted to play which role and create this news broadcast. Also the benefit of this would be that the publication, they could do different publications. Yes, they could write about it, or maybe they create a blog, maybe they create a podcast, maybe they create a video so that they can present this information from a different viewpoint than just a student sitting down writing about what it is that they've read. So I really like that idea. With my student interview, I chose a student that had been in one of my former students. She was in my homeroom class, my first year of teaching 2nd grade. And I reached out to her via email because I thought, well, this is the group I'm targeting. And I just shot her an email and said, hey, is there any way that maybe you or some of your friends have read this book or would be interested in reading this book? And she got back to me and she said, actually, that she had read the book. And she said that she was initially reluctant to read the book, but several of her friends read it. And after seeing it hashtagged often, that she decided, okay, fine, I'm in. So she went on to say, at first reading it, she was disappointed. She felt like she couldn't relate to the main character, Cadence. My former student identifies herself as biracial. Her mother is Mexican and her father is African American. So she initially thought that she couldn't stand reading about this rich white girl and her white girl problems, crying her white girl tears. But she says that as she continues reading, she found herself intrigued with the story. She felt like what turned it around for her was the way that Emily Lockhart used odd, creepy explanations for how the main character was feeling. Like when she talked about herself bleeding as her father left her and her mother, or she talked about how Gat would cure her bleeding. She thought that that was, it kind of drew her in and made the character a little more relatable. She also said that there were different weird descriptions that just gave a uniqueness to the book for her that allowed her to go on and continue reading the book. And by the end, she said she found herself really wrapped up and she was glad that she had read the book. The next person that I interviewed was a fourth grade teacher on our campus. She's relatively new to our campus. She's been on our campus for 2 years. She came from Wyoming, and she has both her bachelor's and her master's degree. During our interview, I explained the book that I chose and asked her if she was familiar with it, and she wasn't. And so she asked me, like, why would I choose this text in particular? She wanted to know if it was the message or was it to help teach a certain principle. And I just explained to her that I chose it because researching popular options. I mean, I'm not familiar with this group. My daughter is 23, so the last time that I had young adult novels in my home has been when she was that age, so it's been quite a while. And then my only teaching experience is second grade as a homeroom. I taught fourth grade, but I taught them in a STEM classroom, so it was under a very different, it wasn't an ELAR situation. So I just explained to her that I just reached out and looked at social media platforms that targeted youth, and eventually through TikTok Books, I found this top 10 book list, and that's how I ended up making my choice. She said that as a teacher that she's curious about adding more young adult novels to what she already has in her classroom, and she is excited to see my final book talk because she's wondering if a book study might would be a good way to have students use a novel in her class. She also wonders if there's more effective ways to guide her students to probe deeper into different novels and talk about themes and without just sitting with them. So we had a good conversation. When I asked her about types of books that she had in her classroom, she explained she has a variety of books in her library, too many to count, that she had fiction, nonfiction on many levels due to the variety of readers. She sorts those books by chapter books and picture books, and then the students have access to them at all times. They can go get them during their small group time. She makes sure that she has different genres that range from science, history, fiction, and fantasy, and she likes for her students to be able to choose anything that they eventually find something that they like, and even just ways to encourage their love of reading. Our campus gives the teachers a time block guide for their instructional days. So, for example, ELAR is 90 minutes, math is 90 minutes, science is 30 minutes, social studies is 30 minutes. But within that block, it's up to the teacher to decide the specific time that they want to do sustained silent reading in their classroom. So she has guided reading groups that she changes based on the data from assessments. And one of her stations is a small group rotation, and that is independent reading. So this is one of the main times that her students access that classroom library. And sometimes they just choose to use their library books that they've checked out. Depending on the day, the rotation is at least 15 minutes, 1 to 2 times a week. And sometimes they might visit that station multiple times. Her text selections, she makes those in the following ways. She has a curriculum that the district mandates she follow, but she also supplements using the TEKS to guide her. So she teaches by genre. At this moment, she's teaching nonfiction. So she takes the suggestions of the curriculum, but if she knows other stories that align, she'll use those. And if she doesn't think that the story that they suggest aligns very well, she'll choose a text that she feels like better fits the TEKS rather. She will then pull that text and teach from it. So she also adds multicultural texts according to the different cultures represented in our school and upcoming cultural dates that are important traditions. Like right now, we're coming into Black History Month. So she makes sure that she's including books that are going to be informative for her student about Black History Month. Incorporating young adult novels for her depends on her small group abilities. For example, um, she mentioned her guiding reading groups. She has one out of the four that reads chapter books, and so only one of those groups would able to be to even read a young adult novel. But she does use them sometimes for a novel study. She found that during the pandemic and at home learning that most difficult for her was getting her students access to resources. She said students did not often have access, and even if they had online access, they often didn't show up. So it made things difficult. She said most of the time she would have half a class online, and she said that the books would not be there or the students could not log on, and it just made the login process difficult or it just didn't happen at all. For my librarian interview, I chose our former junior high librarian. She just moved out of that position this year and is now in a technology position on our campus and is just super helpful in anything that we need. Um, when I asked her how she chose the young adult novels that she ordered, I asked her if she based it on a list of award winners, and she said yes, that she did, that she looked at Texas lists for grade level and grade interest, like Blue Bonnet List, Lone Star, Maverick. She even gave me some attachments that I could go in and look at other like ALA book list. She said for that grade level, she wouldn't choose a two by two, obviously, but the other ways that she would find books is she spoke with her friends who are also young adult librarians and find out what's popular in their schools. She said she would often check blogs. She would ask students what they think were good. She would ask ELAR teachers and then even go to the public library young adult section and just see if there's something in their section that maybe she had missed in the list that she looked at. She said really the list went on and on where she could find resources. So she was excited that there were so many opportunities to find books. When I asked her how she featured new books, she said she would pull a few out at a time because she was by herself in the library. It made it hard to process if she put too many out at once. She said she liked to book talk the new books. Sometimes she would just read a chapter or a few words, just try to get them excited about being the first person to get to check it out. She said she would try to find a book trailer advertising the book or videos that spoke about the books. And that sometimes she had students enter to be the first one to check out a book after she shared it. That way they would be excited and then people would put on holds and then that would keep the book in the rotation. She said another way that she would try to get students excited is she did what she called a blind date with the book. And so she would have students put their name in and then she would pull certain books that she thought might be interesting to them and she would get them books that they might not would have chosen if it hadn't been for this blind date that they had with the book. She said she really didn't do anything differently with award books. She said sometimes if they sent her posters, then she would highlight those as needed. What she really liked to do was tie books in with whatever lesson or skills that they were learning in their ELARC classes. And when I asked her about trends and circulations that she noticed, she said that the hard truth is my young adult readers like the depressing books. They love A Child Called It, 13 Reason Why, A Long Way Down, American Boys. And she said dystopian was a really popular book with this group of readers. She said they enjoy realistic stories, and she said that humor books were probably the least checked out for her. So I found lots of valuable resources when I was doing my research. I know sometimes people tend to shy away from paid teachers, maybe, but there were so many great options, even just to give yourself an idea of where you could jump off. So I really liked some of the options there. I mentioned vocabulary.com before, teachingbooks.net had some amazing resource. I was really glad to see that Emily Lockhart had options for teachers and focuses for teachers. So just so many great things out there that were connected with We Were Liars. And I was glad that I chose this book to be my young adult novel this semester.